The rumor of the eclipse had reached Port Farallon months before the moon even began its slow pilgrimage toward the sun. For most of the town's 3,000 residents, the event was little more than an item on the yearly festival calendar, an excuse to string paper lanterns under the pier and bake cardamom spaced buns shaped like crescent moons. To Elara Finch, however, it was a summons she could not ignore. Elara arrived on the midnight train with two trunkfuls of equipment and the diffident gait of someone unaccustomed to crowds. She hurried past the revelers at the station, fiddlers rehearsing Eclipse songs, children advertising hand-painted goggles, until the salt-scoured cottages yielded to the quiet skitter of sand along Gull Road. At the path's end loomed Farallon Light, a whitewashed tower stitched against the sky like a needle meant to mend the seam between sea and stars. Its keeper, Jonas Marrow, was waiting for her on the lantern gallery, his oilskin coat snapping in the wind. "Dr. Finch?" His voice was raspy from disuse. The keeper's post bred solitude. "I warmed the workroom. Best place to map your heaven codes." She blinked in surprise. "You read my letter?" "I read everything that crosses this threshold," he said, offering one steady hand to guide her up the spiral stair. "Even the parts written only between the lines." The lighthouse smelled of brass polish and weathered paper. Jonas had cleared a table beside a porthole for her brass transit, a century-old instrument she'd inherited from her mentor, Professor Atria. That same mentor had mailed her, months before her death, a bundle of brittle star charts annotated in a cipher no one else had ever managed to break. Elara had been able to crack only fragments enough to sense that the eclipse would complete a puzzle begun long before either of them was born. She spread the charts across the table. On each was the etched skeleton of a constellation, Lelera Cygnus, Aquila, interlaced with strange runes like hatch marks left by wings against parchment. At the center of every sheet, Atria had inked 2 points, one a star from mythic lore, the other a place very much of the earth. Between them ran a crooked line, and beside that line always the same 5 symbols. Jonas leaned closer. "Those look nearly maritime." "Not quite," Elara murmured. "They're part of something called the Skyborn Code." Atria believed that ancient navigators carved it into both sails and sextants. "It's a language of alignments, a way to write sentences with shadows, angles, echoes." She touched one inked pair of circles. "Here, these two are Altamira legend calls them lovers, who were separated when the gods pitched one to sea and the other to sky. The code promises if their 2 lights ever merge again, all hearts sundered by distance may draw together." She hesitated, embarrassed by her own earnestness. "I know how it sounds." Jonas's smile was small but genuine. "Like something worth chasing. Especially for those who live on cliffs. Cliff dwellers," she thought. That's what they both were. Her with her observatory's lonely domes in the mountains, he with his beacon perched high above the battering tide. People who watched vastnesses for a living. Jonas opened a leather folio and unfurled the lighthouse's original 1864 construction blueprints. Chief engineer back then was obsessed with celestial symmetry. You know why the lantern room is octagonal. Dunstan's comet had an 8-pointed tail. He thought building the tower in its image would anchor heaven's passing wonders to our shore. Elara traced a finger from the gallery balcony to the Fresnel lens. "I need to know if this lens can be re-angled. The code indicates a beam must intersect the eclipse inner corona at the moment of maximum darkness. It can be angled, though it's risky," Jonas said. "That lens weighs as much as a small automobile. But if it's part of your Skyborn sentence, so be it. Eclipse peaks tomorrow at 4:13 p.m. We have until then to figure your trajectory." They worked through the night, cross-referencing Atria's notes with tide charts and civic land maps. Outside, clouds scudded like ghost ships across the half-lit moon. By dawn, the charts had revealed a new instruction. A secondary beacon had to ignite from Widow's Bluff, an old signal post a mile south, precisely 9 seconds after the lighthouse beam struck the corona, else the code would collapse into gibberish. The run between here and the bluff is treacherous, Jonas cautioned. Spring tides swallow the road at high noon. We'd need a runner who can keep pace with receding waves. Alar pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose. I'm not built for sprinting. He tapped the scar above his left brow. I took a lightning strike in 22, still faster than most storms. I'll light the secondary lamp. He fixed her with iron gray eyes. But you must promise to hold the beam even if the tower groans. You do your part, I'll do mine. She nodded. Agreement sealed. By early afternoon, the town quays were thick with picnic blankets and brass telescopes rented by the hour. Vendors hawked Eclipse buns and Eclipse beer. The library sponsored a trivia contest. Name every moon of Jupiter, win a free library card. And a folk band rehearsed a ballad commemorating two doomed lovers from Port Farallon folklore. Alara caught snatches of the tune drifting up the cliff. Oh, Altamira, sky and sea, love's tether cut by tide, but when the black sun crowns the lee, your hearts again will bide. The legend had lived in their songs all along, she realized. It made her chest ache. At 3:50, the day turned coppery. Seabirds folded wings and settled on pilings, as if night were barreling in 12 hours early. In the lantern room, Jonas secured the lens's brass carriage in a new cradle he'd forged that morning. Ilara fine-tuned the azimuth motor to within 1,000th of a degree. Down below, the first silver bite appeared on the sun's rim. Her voice quavered. Angle set at 42.9. Copy. Jonas handed her a slip of paper. On it, he'd written the coordinates for his run to Widow's Bluff in a sentence. No love lost between sea and sky if someone remembers to carry the light. Before she could answer, he disappeared down the spiral stair, boots clanging on iron treads. She inhaled once, twice, and fixed her gaze on the heliostats gauge. 3:59. The sun now a glowing athame, carving away its own brilliance. 4:01. The harbor crowd grew still, a hush so sudden it rang louder than any bell. 4:03. Wind punched the gallery windows. Ilara compensated, -3 arcseconds. 4:10. The moon's dark edge slid over the final blaze of photosphere. With gloved hands, she wrenched the carriage release. The Fresnel lens groaned and pivoted, throwing a shaft of gathered white fire across the waves. She realigned until the beam etched a perfect circle of light around the black disk's rim. An incandescent ring 500 million miles tall, yet precise enough to make a mathematician weep. Down the cliff, a lone silhouette sprinted across tidal flats, now glimmering like polished obsidian. Jonas ran as if chased by gods. The 9 seconds between lighting suddenly felt like the distance between galaxies. 4, 13, and 19 seconds. A hush deeper than any hush fell. The umbral lull. The moment when a human heartbeat can be heard 50 yards away. Ilara toggled the master switch. The beam pulsed. A tremor shook the tower. Rivets squealed. Glass panes trembled. But she kept her hands on the controls. Even when the iron catwalk shuddered like a tuning fork plucked by cosmic fingers, she murmured the fractional adjustments aloud. Mantra steady. 4:13 and 28 seconds. A spark flared on Widow's Bluff, Jonas. The secondary beacon hurled a crimson spear that met the lighthouse's silver ring halfway across the sky. Where they crossed, ruby and argent braided like blood and starlight. The braided beam struck the eclipse's dark center and vanished. No, not vanished, Ilara realized. It dove. As if the sky were a lake and the light a stone, ripples radiated from the contact point, ripples of color no spectrum could name. Indigo kissed with gold, magenta veneered by onyx. Something in the air smelled of cedar smoke and frozen lightning. The lantern room brightened, though the sun was hidden. A pair of luminescent shapes coalesced in the space above the lens. Two figures, semi-propellered, clothed in cascading rays. One reached out with a hand shimmering like a sail beneath dawn. The other mirrored the gesture with the rugged grip of a mariner. When their fingertips touched, the room filled with a low chord, a harmony equal parts thunder and cello. Altamira, Elara thought, throat thick. She searched the shoreline. The crowd below stared skyward in silent awe. Some knelt, others wept. To them, the reunion likely looked like an aurora or optical trick, but every heart knew instinctively what was being mended. Jonas stood beside the bluff's beacon, chest heaving. He looked up at the lantern room and tipped an imaginary hat. The echo of the gesture traveled the braided beam, so that his silhouette seemed to graze Ilara's own outline 2 miles away. In that impossible instant, she felt his hand close around hers, though physics insisted it could not be. As quickly as it began, the darkness lightened. The moon slipped on, revealing a crescent sun. The braided beam dissolved into ordinary daylight. The two luminous figures folded into each other like hands closing around a secret, and were gone. The lens carriage slammed back into its rest with a metallic clang, pitching Alara forward. She caught herself, breath ragged. Below, the festival erupted in cheers. Bells rang from the harbor master's tower, horns blared, gulls scattered in jubilation. Port Farallon had witnessed a miracle. But Alara's miracle was not finished. Footsteps pounded the stairs. Jonas burst through the hatch, soaked from sea spray, face alight with wonder. "You held the tower," he said, voice raw. "So I kept my promise." And the code kept its own. She removed one glove and offered her hand. Salt crystals glittered on his brow. When their palms met, something settled in her chest, as though the last puzzle piece clicked into place. Below, the Eclipse party swelled into full-blown carnival, but up in the lantern room, the two of them lingered among gear, glass, and silence, listening to the lighthouse creak like a ship easing into a new current. Jonas was first to speak. "There's one part of your mentor's cipher I read by lamplight while you were fixing the azimuth. A postscript." He fished a torn scrap from his coat. On it was a single line in Atria's careful script. "When the lovers of sky and sea are joined, the keepers of their tale must walk together henceforth, else the story unravels again." Ilara traced the ink with a fingertip. "You're saying the code bound us?" "I think we bound ourselves the moment we chose to trust each other." He shrugged. "But the skyborn language is nothing if not literal. Walk with me?" They descended to the quay, where celebrants danced on tidal slick boards. A group of schoolchildren spotted Alara's transit slung over her shoulder and begged to peek through it. She knelt, angling the scope to Venus, brightening in still bruised daylight. Jonas steadied the tripod, parents took photos, laughter soared, and somewhere a busker replayed the Altamira ballad. But this time the melody carried triumph instead of mourning. Dusk settled, lanterns bobbed along the pier, reflections rippling like a second firmament stitched to the first. Elara and Jonas slipped away from the noise to sit on a stone seawall crusted in lichen. "I used to watch eclipses alone," she said, digging toes into cool sand. "Even during totality, they felt partial." She hesitated. "Today felt complete." Jonas tucked a piece of driftwood into his pocket. Souvenir or talisman, she couldn't tell. "I've steered ships away from breakers for 11 years. Never thought I'd aim a beam toward the sun." He chuckled, a gentle sound. "Turns out even lighthouses can point skyward." They fell into easy quiet, out past the harbor, where city gleam surrendered to moonpath. Two bright points glimmered on opposite edges of the horizon, the evening star and a lone fishing vessel's masthead. She thought of the code's promise. "All hearts sundered by distance may draw together." Perhaps the same law governed these two new watchers, one who named constellations, one who read shoals. She breathed a question into the wind. "What comes after reunion?" "Maintenance," he answered without irony. "Beacons need polishing. Stories need retelling, and people, especially those drawn by a rare alignment, need choosing. Every dawn, Elara smiled. Then I choose to stay until next dawn. Good, he said, tangling his fingers with hers in the pocket of his coat. I was hoping you'd help repair the prism bench I cracked during that lens pivot. Could be a long job. They watched the afterglow leak from the sky until the first true stars pricked through. Above the lighthouse, a faint, unfamiliar smudge appeared. A nebular bloom in a place telescopes had always sworn was empty. Elara's pulse quickened. The code was still writing. Look, she pointed. Jonas shielded his eyes, though the phenomenon was bright enough to see unaided. New constellation? Or new chapter, she whispered. They rose together, struck by a sudden urgency to fetch charts and note the coordinates before the nebula faded. But for a lingering breath, they stood in mutual tether, as if any step not taken in unison might unspool the fragile line now binding sea to sky, keeper to astronomer, heart to heart. When at last they moved as one, two silhouettes crossing the sand, trailing long eclipse-forged shadows that merged and remerged in the silver of an ordinary moon. The town's festival chorus followed them up the hill, a refrain drenched in salt and starlight, promising that some separations need never happen again so long as someone, somewhere, remembers to aim the light.